Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking into, well, a connection you might not expect. It's about the tiny things living in our gut probiotics and how they might connect to our emotions.
Exactly. We're digging into some really interesting research today. It's from Katarina Johnson and Laura Steenbergen.
Right. Published in NPJ Mental Health Research.
Yeah, and they've been exploring whether these, beneficial bacteria can actually nudge our emotional state.
And what they found is, well, it's pretty striking, isn't it?
It really is.
It seems taking probiotics might be a way to kind of gently reduce feelings like stress, anxiety, even just feeling worn out.
Yes, that's the core finding. And what's really fascinating is how they saw these changes.
Okay.
They used daily mood reports, just simple check-ins. And these picked up improvements that the more standard psychological tests didn't always catch.
Which, it makes you think. Could something so seemingly simple, just taking probiotics, actually change how you feel day to day?
That's the big question.
Okay, let's break it down. For anyone maybe not totally clear, what exactly are probiotics?
Right, so think of them as friendly microbes, mostly bacteria. You find them in supplements, sure, but also naturally in fermented foods, yogurt, some cheeses, sauerkraut, things like that.
And we usually hear about them for digestion, right? Gut health.
That's the traditional view, yeah. Good for the gut. But this new research is looking beyond that, towards mental well-being.
So this is where that gut-brain connection comes in. Johnson mentions that. How does that actually work? What are the pathways?
It's a really complex two-way communication system. Johnson points to a few main routes.
Okay.
There's the vagus nerve. Think of it like a direct phone line almost, from the gut right up to the brainstem, sending signals back and forth constantly.
Wow. Okay. A direct link.
Yeah. Then there's the immune system. A huge chunk of our immune cells are actually in the gut.
Right.
So inflammation or changes there can send signals that affect the brain, mood, everything.
I see. And the third?
Hormones. The gut actually produces a lot of hormones, including a significant amount of serotonin, the feel-good chemical you hear about.
So the gut is actually making mood chemicals.
It's making neurotransmitters and hormones that definitely influence mood, yeah. It's a real conversation happening between the gut and brain.
Okay, so we've kind of heard about this gut-brain idea before. Why did Johnson and Steenbergen decide to investigate this specific angle with probiotics now? What were they hoping to find out?
That's a good point. There have been quite a few studies in animals showing probiotics could affect brain function. But when researchers tried to replicate that in humans...
Mixed results.
Exactly. Bit of a mixed bag. Some studies showed effects, others didn't. So they wanted to use a more comprehensive approach, combine different methods to get a clearer picture.
And what did that comprehensive approach look like? What methods did they actually use?
Well, they combined the standard psychological questionnaires, the ones often used in these kinds of studies, but they added those daily mood trackers we mentioned. Just simple daily questions about feelings.
Ah, the key difference.
Seems like it. And they also included some computer tasks designed to measure how people process emotional information, like recognizing facial expressions, subtler stuff.
And who were the participants? Who took these probiotics?
They recruited healthy young adults. One group took a daily probiotic supplement for a month.
Any specific strains?
Yes, it contained Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium strains. Two of the most commonly studied and used types. You see them a lot in yogurts and supplements.
Got it. And the comparison?
They compared them to another group, taking a placebo, basically a sugar pill. Looked identical, but had no active bacteria. Standard practice for this kind of trial.
Okay, so the crucial part. What did those daily mood reports, the ones that were different, actually reveal?
This is really where it gets interesting. The daily check-ins showed a noticeable drop in negative feelings.
Like what specifically?
Things like feeling anxious, stressed, fatigued, or, having depressive tendencies. The probiotic group reported significantly less of that compared to the placebo group over the month.
Wow. So those simple questions really showed something. Steenbergen commented on that, didn't she?
She did. She basically said it was remarkable that just by asking people daily how they felt, they could detect these positive effects on mood from the probiotics.
Which the other tests missed.
Yeah, she contrasted it with the standard questionnaires, suggesting they just weren't sensitive enough to pick up these maybe more subtle day-to-day shifts.
It really makes you wonder about how we measure mood, doesn't it? Maybe sometimes the direct approach is best.
It certainly suggests that, doesn't it? Sometimes asking the obvious question yields the clearest answer.
So these improvements in negative feelings, how long did it take for them to show up? Was it immediate?
No, not immediate. The data suggested it took about 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
Yeah, roughly 2 weeks for that reduction in negative feelings to become statistically significant compared to the placebo group.
That time frame. It sounds a bit like how long some conventional antidepressants can take to start working.
That's a really interesting parallel, and the researchers noted it too. But they also pointed out a really crucial difference.
Oh, what was that?
Well, you know how sometimes antidepressants, while helpful, can sort of blunt emotions generally, both positive and negative.
Yeah, that can be a side effect for some people.
Right. But in this study, the probiotics seemed to specifically reduce the negative feelings without really touching the positive ones. People still felt happy, engaged, etc.
That's a potentially significant difference.
It is. But, and this is really important, the researchers were very clear. This doesn't mean probiotics are a replacement for prescribed antidepressants.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Absolutely. A critical point. Okay, so did the study find that maybe certain kinds of people got more benefit from these probiotics?
Yes, they did look into that. Johnson pointed out something interesting related to personality traits. Like individuals who scored higher on a measure of propensity for risk avoidance. They seemed to get a bigger mood boost.
Propensity for risk avoidance. Okay, can we unpack that a bit? What does that mean in everyday terms?
It could mean someone who tends to be more cautious, maybe worries a bit more about potential downsides, perhaps hesitant in new situations, generally plays it safe.
I see. So if you perhaps recognize that tendency in yourself, this research suggests probiotics might be particularly helpful for easing those associated negative feelings.
That's what the data seems to suggest, yeah. A more pronounced reduction in negative mood for those individuals.
Fascinating. Okay, beyond the overall mood, did the probiotics affect anything else? You mentioned those computer tasks?
Yes, there was some evidence there too, although perhaps a bit more subtle.
Okay.
The group taking the probiotics shows slight improvements in accurately recognizing facial expressions on those computer tests.
So maybe a link between gut bacteria and how we read social cues.
It kind of hints at that, doesn't it? That gut health might even play a role in our social cognition. Very intriguing.
Definitely. But obviously, as with any research, especially in a newer field, there are still questions left, right?
Oh, absolutely. Loads of questions. The researchers themselves are quick to point out we still need to figure out the exact how.
The mechanisms?
Exactly. How are these bacteria actually signaling to the brain to cause these changes? And also, what are the long-term effects? This was just a 1-month study.
Right. We need more research on the duration.
Definitely. And Steenbergen also floated an idea about potential future uses.
As an intervention.
Yeah, she suggested, cautiously, that maybe down the line, probiotics could potentially be used as an early intervention strategy, perhaps to help reduce negative feelings before they develop into more serious mental health conditions.
That's a hopeful thought.
It is, but she stressed, lots more research is needed before we could even consider that seriously.
Yeah.
It's a future prospect.
Understood. And it sounds like they also had a takeaway message for fellow researchers in mental health.
They did. Both Johnson and Steenbergen really pushed for including these simple daily mood measures in future studies more routinely.
Just asking people how they feel each day.
Exactly. Their point was, don't overlook the power of asking the obvious. Sometimes the simplest tools give us incredibly valuable data, especially for tracking these kinds of subtle shifts over time.
It's a great reminder. Okay, so let's try and sum this up. What's the main takeaway you want people listening to get from this deep dive?
I think the key point is that probiotics are showing, real promise. Not as a magic bullet, but as something that might subtly improve emotional well-being, mainly by dialing down those negative feelings, stress, anxiety, fatigue.
And particularly, perhaps, for people with that more cautious, risk-avoidant tendency.
Exactly. That seems to be where the effect was strongest in this study.
And that finding about the daily mood reports, that feels important too. How we might miss things if we only rely on standard tests.
Definitely thought-provoking. It suggests we might need broader toolkits to really understand emotional changes.
So maybe the final thought for you listening is, how does this research make you think about that connection between your own gut and your mind?
Yeah, and could simple things, maybe focusing on gut-friendly foods, or even just tuning into your daily mood more deliberately, could those things have a bigger impact on your well-being than you realize?
Something to definitely chew on. It's a fascinating area to watch.